Okay, looks like this is working today. So I want to start today by giving a little, uh, this is a paraphrase I find a little cleaner than the version that I've seen from Ken Wilber, who's a philosopher of integral theory. No one is smart enough to be completely wrong. This is this is often an invitation to have a good faith listening to perspectives that we're inclined to disagree with. And it's kind of a nudge towards, if I think that somebody is completely off their rocker wrong, then there's a perspective of truth that I'm missing. Like there's some reason why that person came to that belief, and there's something that I'm missing. So if all I can do is judge them as a fool, then I'm actually throwing away a piece of truth, even if I know that the truth is not in the content of what this other person is saying. So when looking at something like, I'm mostly willing to just blanket dismiss the flat Earth conspiracy theories. Like I can entertain quite a lot of weird stuff, but there's a certain limit where I go, I don't see how that actually works. It's a livable framework, but to the extent that we're going to pretend that any idea can be true, I'm going to look at that one and go, no, just no. But there's but having a move of, yeah, like flat Earth conspiracy theorist, like, well, what's that about? This is not a central example for me. I'm just trying to be clear of the type of thing that I'm pointing at. That when I look at a perspective, well, I don't just look at perspectives. In fact, I never look at perspectives. I look at people who are sharing experiences and sharing their points of view and sharing their memes. So if I encounter some people who are espousing flat Earth conspiracy theory, there's a truth there. Some kind of lived experience of encountering the world and interacting with it has resulted in this human being having this kind of framework. It doesn't mean I have to explore, but it does mean that if I choose not to, there is something there that I'm not seeing. So I give that as context because like I've mentioned this in a couple of times in previous videos, but I enjoy the pithy phrase, I grew up immortal. And in a very important way, I am not from the normal culture. I think it's fair to say I'm an American. I'm pretty standard American in a bunch of ways. But there's another way in which the direction I'm coming from is significantly alien. Just because like I grew up seeing all the topics about death and dying and what it means to take problems seriously, to actually take real, literal life and death problems seriously from a very clear lens. Like for me, there's a kind of strange recognition of I feel like I'm pulling on an energy that I don't want to. That's not exactly what I want to do there. Trying to prove that I'm weird. That's not quite what I want to do here. So the reason that context is important is because I grew up practicing defending myself against standard kinds of arguments and ideas that just pervade the culture. I say the culture, this is like all of humanity. Basically, every widespread culture I have ever encountered has some version of explaining why it is that seeking immortality or even wanting it is unwise. And there's some weird philosophical shuffling that'll happen around this about, oh, well, like what would it mean to live forever? I mean, how are you going to outlive the heat death of the universe? And exactly who is living forever? Because these philosophical considerations are so complicated, that means that you shouldn't want to live more than 100 years. And it's like they rarely say it that blatantly, but that's about what their arguments amount to. I think that there are questions about who is immortal? Why is there a drive to not die? What's that about? Not to say that it's bad necessarily, just recognizing, well, if we don't know where that's coming from, why are we believing it? Or why am I, more to the point. But there is something that I am absolutely clear about. I'm absolutely clear about that all of these arguments just never dialogue with, from what I can tell. And I would use this through much of my life as a reason to dismiss these concerns. What if you get bored? Don't you need to make room for the next generation? I want to grow old with the person I love. That's important to me. And like holding those kinds of considerations, I would mostly dismiss them and kind of mock them. And I still have a lot of dismissing, mocking energy that shows up just out of habit. So I haven't totally cleaned this out. That's part of what showing up here is about. And also it's just a matter of time, just having diligence there. So having spent a long time sort of dismissing these, I'm looking at them and going, I think that I may have been missing something here. And after meditating on it, working with it, this has actually reflected back to me something that's become very important for my own practice. But I want to emphasize that there's a reality that these questions, these challenges. What about overpopulation? Like, is it ethical to live that long? Or are you inflicting your own? Like how can you stand to be that egoic to want to live that long? Who are you to want to? Like it's there's I mentioned this in the description for coming into this video. I swear there's something like 12 arguments. I haven't counted them carefully. I haven't tried to list them. It was never central to me because arguing with people about this never gets any traction, which is an important hint. But I swear there's like 12-ish things anyone ever says along these lines. They'll add nuances. Hey, but like Voldemort wasn't a very smart guy. Like he was brilliant, but he wasn't wise. I'm like, okay. Like which trope does this fall into? So there's something, there's a really basic kind of problem that shows up in the reasoning here. I'll highlight this with just one example. And I think I've used this example in previous videos before. We can wax eloquent about the importance of learning to accept death and to not resist when it's our time. But if I'm feeling really resistant and I get terminal cancer, there's something of like, well, do I want to live the rest of my very short life in resistance, and that resistance creating a lot of discomfort and pain for myself, maybe even making the disease worse? Or do I want to accept my end and be grateful for the moments that I have and go into the darkness with equanimity? And then there's some stuff in spirituality and religion that suggests that maybe that's actually really good for what comes after death. Maybe. I'm now at the point of thinking there is a lot of truth in those statements, and it's super confused because it looks to me like there isn't an after. There's an always eternal. But that's its own thing. These are more thoughts and ideas. I don't want to get too much into headspace for this part. So we can wax eloquent about this and point out the real truth, that there is actually an important wisdom that has to do with accepting the inevitable, and that it sure looks like death is inevitable, aging is inevitable. So accepting them seems pretty important. And sure, maybe we can do something about some parts of aging, but ultimately we're going to come to an end. So there is a lot of wisdom and grace in accepting that instead of fighting it. So you don't want to fight reality. Fighting reality tends to create suffering, and it tends to create suffering not only in oneself but in others. So there's an unkindness to oneself and to others by trying to fight this sort of truth. Why not accept it? That seems the wiser path. Right? And frankly, I agree with this. Okay. And there's a resolution to this. There's a paradox here. How can a person who's willing to say, I want to live for centuries, maybe for millennia, I will happily do so, I am happy to have an unbounded life length. I want that. I want to choose if and when I die. And I want to cultivate the wisdom to be able to make that choice. Right? And I want to have the time to cultivate that wisdom. I am super clear about that. And I still look at this and I say, yeah, it's really important to do this kind of acceptance. Absolutely, super important. There's a paradox that shows up in people's lived practice that doesn't confuse them in action. And that's really important. People know this. There's a part of them that isn't confused, but the ideas are completely jammed. If your child, your toddler, like trips and has a really bad cut and it looks like it might have cut an artery, you don't look at the child and go, oh, well, death is inevitable, and I guess this is your time. There's wisdom in accepting your demise. It doesn't help to dumb it down to the kid's level. Like, the problem is that is horrid. You would never do that. You rush the kid to the hospital. You do first aid. We care. That's important to us. So where's the line between where it makes sense to take clear action, to care in order to extend and enhance life, versus accepting it as inevitable? If the line is purely, can we do something about it, then it seems like the question should be, can we see what to do about things like aging? And if the answer is no, to ask, is there a way we can come to? But that isn't the collective will. Instead, mentioning this stuff is, oh, that seems like an impossible problem. And I mean, aging is inevitable anyway. Like, well, that's the assumption that we're trying to challenge. So why are you asserting the assumption in order to say that we shouldn't look? There are a whole bunch of programs out there. I've been familiar with a lot of these for much of my life, and seeing them, I'm going, oh, cool, looks like we're just going to cure aging sometime in the next, like, 20 years. And then 30 years later, I'm looking around going, we've made almost no progress. There's more promise. And the lack of progress seems to be because there's a lack of collective will. We aren't taking this problem seriously. Even if those methods couldn't have worked, why aren't we throwing our energy into a Manhattan Project against aging? I mean, I feel like I know the answer. I'm not too concerned about that. But the point is that there are possibilities, and when it reminds me a little bit of, I don't know, like asking someone out on a date, and let's say something like, oh, I can't because I've got to go to the dentist, so yeah, sorry. You go, oh, okay, well that's fine. I'm not particular about that date. How about the day after? Like, well, I mean, and it's a pretty big dental thing, and I want to make sure that I have time to recover. It's like, okay, all right, so maybe in a couple weeks when you've had some time to recover. I'm going, well, I mean, I've got this big project I need to prepare for, and it's just like, okay, right? It's really obvious that this isn't about the going to the dentist or the big project or school or work or whatever. Like, that's obviously not the issue. The issue is some kind of lack of desire, or an anti-desire, combined with some sort of having to play a game about whether it's okay to be honest about the real reason. Which is fine. People play games. That's what humans do. That's that's what karma looks like. My point is highlighting that there's this similarity when talking about things like, how about we get rid of aging? Well, I mean, what about problem of overpopulation? Well, here's the math about why that's not an issue. But wouldn't you get bored if you lived forever? Well, here's an answer to that. But we need to make room for the next generation. Well, here's a counter argument to that. Well, you know, it's just not my thing. It's not about whether it's your thing. It's as a population thing. This is about, can we rescue our financial resources from being dumped into enormous amounts of geriatric health care and mandatory education to keep our civilization from forgetting over the course of a century everything it knows. What could we do with those resources if they were dumped into infrastructure? Uh, or into trauma recovery, right? We could do some pretty massive stuff there. Well, I mean, but I've got this thing with the dentist. I mean, it's the same structure. It's exactly the same structure. So what that tells me is that that people have difficulty articulating what their real belief is for whatever reason. Like, and maybe they feel unsafe about it, but I suspect it's actually that they don't know. But that it feels super important to oppose this thing, or to dismiss it, or to not look. So, spent a while looking at this. I want to zoom in on a couple of examples to highlight a resolution that has really rung true for me, very deeply true. The punchline is that I think that we actually do, well, this is a bit of a rambly punchline, but I think this is where this hops to. I think we want freedom from aging and obligatory death. I think that's just very clear. What does want mean? Well, it's the same want that has you take your toddler to the hospital, the same want that has you, like if, that has it so that when you're in a lot of pain, you want out of that pain. You don't want to just die. I mean, for most common forms of pain, right? That causes us to try to research cures for cancer. Why? What are we going to do with the cure for cancer? We'll probably cure cancer, right? We're not accepting death there. We're treating it like a disease. And so the desire is there. There's just something very twisted going on in the background about our relationship to death. I think we don't want it, but a part of us knows we need it. So I think the actual issue going on here, and I think this actually cuts to the core of a tremendous amount that's going on for our species as a whole, not just in COVID times. I think this is a general thing. I think this is very general. I think that we haven't earned our immortality. And I bet that once we do, we will get it. I think we'll cure aging once we earn the not needing it anymore. Okay. Now, I don't mean to, I'm invoking a metaphor, or evoking, I guess, evoking a metaphor here that implies something about the structure of reality that I'm fine with implying, but I don't want to assert. It's not something that I'm trying to claim. So as a metaphor, I think thinking of it as though there is some kind of intelligence, like God, guiding the whole thing, and saying, humans, once you've learned your lesson, then we can lift this curse of aging. I'll explain some of what I mean by that in a bit, but I think it's fine to think of it this way, but I suspect that this is a lot closer to if God were evolution. Like it's just a force of nature. I don't think that there's any need to posit an intelligence. There's no need to dismiss it either. This is a paradigm-independent view, or not totally independent, but fairly paradigm general. A fairly paradigm general view here. When I talk about earn, I'm just using a metaphor there. What I mean is, this is something very similar to how trying to come up with a metaphor that doesn't reveal things about people who aren't involved in this. Like when in a family that has a long line of alcoholic parents abusing their kids, the kids grow up and become alcoholic, like that kind of transgenerational trauma. What is involved in healing the trauma? There's, or rather the way that I would want to phrase this is, what is involved in them growing up and then having a good relationship that feels connective, raises kids, and the kids are healthy. Emotionally, physically, that don't become alcoholics. What's involved in that? In a way, I think it would be fair to say that somewhere along the way, someone needs to earn their freedom from alcoholism, which is to say that there's a type of trauma that they need to process. There's a in connection with reality that they need to reestablish. A contraction from truth that they've learned to rely on that they need to unfurl. And it involves some pain, some difficulty, some important digestion. But if they can get there, then they can have a good relationship. And they can raise kids, and the kids will be healthy. So how do they do that? Well, that's tricky, isn't it? Like, it depends a lot on the details of how that particular trauma transmits through the family. Okay. I'm looking around and I'm seeing exactly the same thing. It's just that there's a type of, like, in an important way, one way to think about this is that there is actually wisdom hidden in the alcoholism, which doesn't mean the alcoholism is wise, but there is a wisdom that the alcoholism sort of, it applies a force that says you will either gain wisdom or you will die. You will either gain wisdom or you will continue to suffer, and the suffering will get worse and worse and worse. Okay? That's the promise. In some very important sense, that's the general promise of death. Death writ very large. Lately I've been doing a bunch of looking into some of the historical meanings around the Roman god Saturn and how those attributions got applied to the planet Saturn in astrological contexts. And so what I would also want to say something like Saturnian. This is the promise of Saturn. So I mean it sort of metaphorically like that. If like Saturn, the god of death, or really the god of truth, like gives this promise. You will be given no quarter until you choose the truth. That is absolutely in support, and you will hate this support, and I will not abandon you. That is the Saturnian promise. Right? So, if the alcoholic, if the child of alcoholics, if they can orient to the alcoholism and harvest its wisdom, and can, on beyond just being able to learn from the pain, can actually choose to learn from the pain before the pain becomes unbearable and forces the lesson. Like noticing, okay, I don't have to destroy my life. I saw this happening with my parents. I heard legends of my grandparents. I'm sitting with this. I'm watching the potential for my life to go down the tubes. Let me turn to that lesson before it hits me. Then there's an opportunity to do something that is more graceful and that's kinder. It's not any less emotionally hard, but it's less mechanically hard because now they aren't dealing with actually having ethanol screwing with their brains. Their bodies aren't deteriorating from this. There's a lot more potential. And it's not that they're lost if they have to go through the school of hard knocks, but there's a mercy. There's a really important mercy. When I went to Mexico to explore working with Bufo, it's a way of working with 5-MeO-DMT. Basically a way of just, bam, you experience God. Bam! Metaphorically speaking, but it's like, if you go through this, it's like, that's a very reasonable description. You just experience God. They would have this phrase of go willingly or be dragged. When I use the term karma, that's basically what I'm talking about, is any of these forces that have the go willingly or be dragged aspect to them. If you take the be dragged option, which is what most people do, and it's not like this is what most people do. This is like that. I add a little bit of that energy, and I would like to not have that happen in me, because what I actually mean is that it is normal for people to go into kind of an automaticity because of the because that's the weight of what they're carrying. That's part of how they're being dragged, and there's this automaticness of choosing, well, that's hard. I'm going to do this easier thing, rather than asking, wait, where does this road take me? Can I learn the lessons without taking the pain first? That's not a question that we're used to asking. Here I'm generalizing again. I notice this very much for me, but this is one that I'm pretty inclined to generalize. I don't mean to say this is true of all people, but I think it's pretty obvious for culture. It's really obvious for culture where we keep outsourcing our responsibility to agencies and to systems without tracking that. I mean, yeah, it seems obvious to me that this is a cultural thing. So, yeah, just this this quality of go willingly or be dragged, that just happens over and over and over and over and over again. So when I'm talking about karma, I don't mean like a cosmic bank account where some kind of celestial energy says, have you been good or have you been bad? And let's like, now I'm talking about something more like, how sticky is your determination to not look at truths that are hard to look at? If it's really sticky, then there's going to be a tendency to look away from the truth systematically, and then reality will come knocking. Not because there's some sort of cosmic thing of you've been bad, but because if you keep distancing yourself from truth, after a while, what you are doing won't match reality, and that difference will at some point matter a lot. So, like, that stickiness, that's what I mean by karma. I sort of suspect that may have been what Siddhartha meant by karma to begin with, but I'm not sure. Hey, Jake. You say, oh, you're quoting from my initial thing where I said, I don't recall hearing a new objection in the last quarter century. And for people who are viewing this, but may not have read the thing that's a reference to, I haven't heard a new objection to the suggestion of removing aging or possibly living unbounded lifespans in about the last quarter century. So Jake says, I want people to live long enough to think of new ones. Yeah, yeah. Me too. I would love for people to live long enough to find new ways to point out how I am wrong. That would be wonderful. That would be really good. Okay, so I paid all of this because there's something when looking at when we look at the whole picture. Let me just stick with aging, just to give it aging is a very concrete case where it seems to me very obvious that almost no one wants aging. Almost no one wants to age. They don't want to see the people they love age. They don't want to go through it. But it's hard to admit all the way down because of some kind of tangle. I think that some of that tangle is actually wrapped up with, it's a little bit like so if we could take a pill and cure aging, there'd actually be a way in which that would be deeply horrific. It would be really, really, really bad. The reason is sort of like if you could give a pill to a child of alcoholics, maybe adult child of an alcoholic, and then bam, their alcoholism, their inclination to pick up a bottle or get addicted to picking up the bottle vanishes. There's some questions about the mechanism of how that works that really matter a whole lot. But let's suppose that there's just some sort of weird thing going on in the brain of associating, well, not that necessarily that weird, but like maybe the alcoholic has a genetic, I'm suspicious about whether there's actually a genetic tendency towards alcoholism. I haven't done research, but what I observe follows emotional patterns much more clearly than it does genetic ones, but I haven't done the research, and I'm not. So don't take that with a spoonful of salt. But let's suppose that there's like some sort of genetic addiction to alcohol that causes this pattern to go through the genetic line, and the thing this pill does is block the genetic addiction. So the person can have alcohol, but they go, yeah, that was a nice beer, and I think I'm done. Okay. Part of my suspicion is about the fact that I think one of the reasons why the addictive pattern happens is because, in many cases, maybe most, is that the alcohol allows a way to numb emotions and prevent awarenesses that the person is trying to avoid. And I don't see how to give somebody a pill to keep that addictive cycle from happening. But in any case, the problem with curing the alcoholism with a pill, is that it doesn't address the emotional patterns that have been transmitted through the family such that the addiction to the alcohol became the method by which they were dealing with the feelings that would cause the abuse, that would cause the children to be raised with this pattern continuing. Right? It might cut the expression, but that particular habit still lives in the adult child of the alcoholics, in the alcoholic family. So it doesn't actually solve the problem, it just suppresses the symptom. So there's a need. This is not just because we don't have better tools. It's actually a deep, deep need. In a transgenerational way and in a deep, I want to say in a soul-based way, there is a necessity that at some point, maybe even with the help of that pill, possibly, but at some point, the alcoholic needs to either harvest the lesson, harvest the wisdom, harvest the syncing up with reality that is available in the pain of the addiction, or they are going to perpetuate the problem elsewhere. Basically guaranteed. This is, I feel like I'm spelling out a different way of articulating the laws of karma. I'm just trying to avoid pretending like there's some sort of spiritual bank account, or like you get positive karma and negative karma and blah 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 blah. I'm just looking at these structures. These are structures that can be described in terms of mimetic evolution. They're very perceptible once you know to look for them. What I'm looking at is there isn't a way, best as I can tell, to give a pill to cure a transgenerational trauma that doesn't result in, sorry, I was about to say, the grammar of that was about to be wrong. I don't see a way to give a pill to cure a transgenerational trauma in a way that doesn't end up resulting in that trauma just being expressed somewhere else, unless the person uses the space created by said pill to harvest the wisdom that is in the transgenerational trauma. That's got to happen at some point. They've got to say, let me learn. Normally, the way that happens is the pain becomes too much and it either kills them or it forces them to look. That's that second one. This is the school of hard knocks, is the thing where people's lives are destroyed, everything is in cinders, everybody has left them, they're just sitting alone and they're going, my life is fucked up. This is the bottom. If it goes any farther, I'm going to die. And I almost don't care because I'm that close. I have to change. Okay? That's that point where that decision gets me in the school of hard knocks. So I posit that the same thing right now is going on with aging. I think the whole relationship with death is the same way, but I claim the same thing is happening with aging. And I think that one is a very clean example in the domain of death. Because, so if we were to muster together some sort of way of repairing aging damage in bodies, right? And it's important to emphasize this because this is like treating it like a mechanical engineering problem. Which I know sounds kind of strange for me to say, let's treat it like a mechanical engineering problem. Well, how else are you going to treat it? We're talking about a mechanical engineering problem. Say a bunch of my my scientific materialist leaning friends. And it's the challenge with that is that the current framework of the scientific materialist paradigm doesn't include this thing that I keep wanting to use the word karma to mean. It's not accounting for that dimension because it's not a well-known mechanism. I claim there's a way to fit it in the paradigm using evolutionary memetics. I think it fits beautifully. It's very straightforward, but I also notice a lack of will to do that too. So I think there's something broken about the motivations for the engineering paradigm. So the there's this, if we were to somehow do the mechanical fix, the purely mechanical fix, so that we can fix the skin and we can get the organs to repair, we can, like, poof, we can now make 80-year-olds look and function and feel like 20-year-olds. And there's some weird stuff about what does that mean for the brain, because the brain goes through changes that actually define some of the thinking patterns of people in their older age, and they wouldn't, blah, whatever. Let's like wave our hands and say we somehow get a magic wand and poof, we can cure aging. So this would actually destroy basically all of human culture very quickly. It would, like almost all of our financial systems are built on the assumption that you can have compound interest, but eventually every person dies. So they can't keep collecting interest forever. And that people will have necessary expenses that are often tied to issues of the body breaking down. It's absolutely stunning how foundational that is. By the way, I suspect that this whole dynamic is part of the reason why corporations have become such immensely powerful entities. They can significantly outlive the horizon that makes compound interest a sane thing to do for person-to-person interaction of saying, hey, I'll give you a loan, but it's going to be at this kind of interest rate because I want to make some money off of the fact that I'm going to be without this money, so I can't use it. So I want to benefit from it. So that's the deal. Do you accept? Like that makes sense in a human-to-human, heart-to-heart context. It doesn't make sense when you're talking to Methuselah. And that's a lot of what seems to be going on with corporations. Their functional horizon is quite a bit longer. That's not the only thing, but I think it's one of the components that we're seeing. If the world were made of corporations, if individuals are functioning like corporations, this sort of hints at how bad it would be to cure aging. And like that just has to do with the economic side. There are questions of like the whole dating market would get completely broken. Because how do you tell who's your age? People would start to come up with their own improvisational ways of wearing different clothing and having different ways of operating. They'd start to try to create cultures. But it would be really hard if 80-year-olds look just as young and hot as the 20-year-olds. If they look just the same. Right? Well, that's a challenge. That's going to mess up all of the sexual dynamics. Right? What happens when you complicate the sexual dynamics? Well, we don't know. We've never been able to model that well. And what about the workforce? When you have an engineer who has been working in like aerospace engineering for 150 years, how does this relate to the 20-year-olds who, or the say 25-year-olds who are like out of college trying to get a job? Well, I'm sorry, but it would like like we put together like 6, 8, 10 of you. That's not as good as this one person over here with 150 years of experience in this. So like, sorry kids, but you need to get more experience. But as you're getting more experience, so is this person. Oops. Like, so there's actually a lot of dynamics that we haven't even begun as a culture to face about what it would mean to even double the human lifespan, let alone remove the aging cap. We haven't even begun those conversations in any meaningful way. We've mostly been talking about, when the topic comes up, why it would be bad. And we don't talk about it this way. We talk about it in terms of these moral things of, well, what about overpopulation? And wouldn't you get bored? And isn't there grace in aging? That one is particularly weird. Okay, I mean, they're all weird. But I think the core issue is that, just like with the alcoholism, there's something important missing when we're treating this as a mechanical and biological engineering problem, which is that our species lacks the will to treat this as a serious medical problem for a reason. And I think that reason is actually hidden in the resistance that shows up for most people when this topic comes up. Like, well, I need to make room for the next generation. We would have eternal dictators. Right? There's actually something important going on here. It's not enough to counter-argument it. I can say why eternal dictators is not a sufficient reason. Like, we're getting eternal dictators in the form of corporations showing up. Does that mean that we're better off for having the people who have memories about history and know the context of these corporations are also becoming senile and dying off? So the corporations can raise the children into being brainwashed? Are we really that much better off? Like, so there are ways to provide logical counter-arguments, but it's not about the logic. This is something that has become very clear to me. So I want to grab a couple of examples, but let me start with one. It was one of the most standard arguments, and I want to highlight that there's actually something beautiful and important being said here. I think this is true for basically all of the anti-immortality arguments I've ever encountered. So let me look at, but wait, wouldn't you get bored? My usual gut reaction is, well, what if you get bored now? Do you want me to kill you? But there's an important way in which it's really dismissive. Because the context of getting bored now is very different from the context of having existed for 5,000 years, having done everything, seen everything, everything is familiar. I imagine that there's a kind of horror, a possibility of a horror that shows up. It's not just a matter of an inconvenient feeling. There's a sense of, I can't die and there's nothing to do and it's all just rote. It's so numbingly familiar. And I imagine that, to the extent that that's right, that's coming from something like a lived experience of, man, childhood was bright and everything was new, but now that I'm older, things are less bright. And I feel like I remember like the weeks before Christmas. Like when we got into December, it was like 5,000 years before we got to Christmas. I just like, how, like, maybe if I, like, Santa, if I hop around, I'm super excited. Like, is it soon? No, dear, it's been 5 minutes. 5 minutes is forever. How many 5 minutes are there? There's a lot. So there's this immense excitement about just that short amount of time. Now here I am going, oh, as a, God, how old am I? 38? I'm 38. As a 38-year-old, we get to December and I go, oh, cool. So here we are going into Christmas. This is probably going to be a little weird because it's COVID year. But here we are. 25 days to Christmas. This is going to be pretty cool. And then I think some things, I write some things, I look up and I go, oh, it's a week away. And there's a part of me that sort of expects if I sort of blink, then suddenly it's going to be here. This experience is less true of me now than it was even a couple of months ago, but it's very much there. And I definitely don't have the experience that I did when I was 6. Right? Super excited. Christmas is forever away. So if I imagine that kind of trend continuing of things having a drudgery, and when it's not drudgery, it's kind of exhausting. Like, because if it's not drudgery, that means something went wrong. Like, I'm just building up my nest egg. Oh, turns out my investments all crashed. Like, that's new, but that's not a type of new I like. In fact, as I get older, new tends to mean bad. So I have a choice between bad and same, and that just gets stronger over time. Like, oh, extend that forever? That is horrid. Utterly numbing. Utterly terrible. So when I look at that and I get the sense of, well, what is the, like, following Ken Wilber's thing, I think I mentioned at the beginning, no one is smart enough to be completely wrong. What's going on in this argument? What if I get bored? And there's a way that I can look at that and I can honor it and I can give it some grace, which is something like, I can see the challenge there. And so for me, and this is where it warps right back into, what does this mean about me? Because then the question becomes, if I turn it around, the question is, what way of living would allow me to overcome that challenge so that that challenge to immortality is one that I have beaten? In this particular case, what that is what is a way of living that would mean that I wouldn't get bored after 200, 500, 1,000, 10,000 years? It's hard to imagine when you jump to those many orders of magnitude, right? Like 10,000 years. I have no idea how to do that. That's a long time. 1,000 years is already stunning. And then 10 times that? Bah, I don't know. But I can answer a question of something like, well, I know that there's a kind of sameness that I can impose on my life right now. Or I can look at it and really see it fresh. I can see this moment fresh. I can see the way in which this moment will never happen again. It's infinitely new. And I can play with that and notice, well, I've had that thought before. Oh, that has the sameness. So where is the freshness? Where is there an aliveness of being that would make it so that living a really long time would become more and more wonderful rather than more and more drudgery? And that ends up folding into something that practically becomes a spiritual practice for me. Looking around going, how can I really live? How can I really live? That's just from looking at that one question and taking it honestly seriously. So that's, to me, there's something here that's going on about, and I think there's another thing to highlight here about one of the gifts of aging. I'm going to reflect on one of the gifts of aging here, which is that when our bodies break down, or we look older, or when things happen such that we're no longer able to do the things that we could do before, right? Like lately for me, I've been cultivating a lot of freeing my heart and my body and being from a whole lot of the deep emotional tangles that were actually making it really difficult for me to really love and enjoy my relationships with women, my romantic relationships with women. A lot of nervousness around sex, intense nervousness around sex. So a lot of that, I'm finally getting a hold of how to weed it out. And there's relief, there's delight, there's excitement, and there's also sorrow. Because there's this sense of, oh man, if I could have done this 20 years ago, there's a whole phase of how I could have shown up, how I could have been in support of women's erotic and emotional flourishing at that age, and we could have co-grown better in more joy. And kinks and glitches in relationships, like in a huge arc that I went through for my marriage. There's a lot of things with that I'm like, I can't do that anymore. I can't I can't go date 20-year-old women and have the experience that I would have wanted, because that difference of 18 years really matters now. It's not to say that some kind of romantic interaction across that time gap is off the table. It's not like, oh God, that 18 years, can't handle that. It's more that I can't be 22. I can't be 20 as well. That's done. I am now in my late 30s, showing up to whatever happens in my life. I can't live my 20s better. So there's a preciousness that is lost. And it's perfect, exactly as it is, but there's sorrow there. So there's a way where, now that's just time. Like that has very little to do with aging. Although the fact that there's been a little bit of aging on my body shows up such that I don't think I look 20 anymore. If I shave my beard, I actually look shockingly closer to 20 than you might think. But I definitely don't look like I did when I was 20. And there's a kind of fitting in that it becomes difficult. And aging does something like this pretty systematically, so that a lot of times you'll find that people who are elderly have a lot of regrets. Say things like, I wish that I had spent more time with people I loved. I wish I had taken the time to do the things that were important to me instead of the things that I thought I was supposed to do. It's like, I think a very powerful exercise. I really recommend basically everybody do this. This is like basic aging education. Is go search for things that elderly people regret. Take a look at that. Because this is like asking for the medicine of or asking for the wisdom of the disease before having the disease force the wisdom on you. I think this makes a lot of sense. So you'll find these themes of, I wish that I had taken more time to love better. I wish I hadn't spent so much time on work. I wish I had traveled when my body was young and I could travel. That's a pretty common one for people who have travel in their hearts. People who will get into their 60s, and 60s and 70s will often say things like, yeah, I wish I had actually taken my dreams seriously, because I don't have my dreams any less now than I did then, but now I'm tired all the time and my body can't handle as much, and so I have less ability to make my dreams happen. I wish I had paid attention when I was younger. Okay? So part of what this whole business of, well, what if I get bored? This is highlighting, well, aging teaches you the same lesson. Well, what if you get bored? You get to the end of your life and you have regrets. Now you know, at least in your old age, to treasure these last moments you have on earth. Right? These last moments might last another 10 years, or maybe it's only a day. As you get older and you get into your 80s, 90s, there's something of like clocks ticking. Do you cringe, or do you recognize how precious this moment is? Do you choose to live, or do you choose to be bored? Choose to do the boring thing of locking yourself into these patterns. That's the invitation. That's the Saturnian promise. The guarantee that you will learn the truth, even if it kills you. So the question is, how willing are we to learn that truth? So by doing this flip on this, well, what if I get bored? I notice I actively start seeking some of the lessons of aging. So there's a vision that I can see of a culture, a worldwide culture, where we would actively pursue the wisdom of aging before aging forces that wisdom on us. We know this, we understand this level of thing of going, school of hard knocks or choose the truth. Those are our choices. Go willingly or be dragged. I choose to go willingly. A culture of here's how to go willingly. Do you want to know? This can be hard. This can be challenging. But there's a culture to support you here. That kind of culture, that culture absolutely would have bountiful will to do a Manhattan Project to actually cure aging. And more importantly, it would not be doing so out of a contracted fear of, oh God, aging might happen to me or to people I love, and I can't stand that, better fix it, because bad. Because that's not coming from the place of being in touch with, well, but what is aging doing for us? What are its graces? What are its blessings? If we were to cure aging, what would we lose? Can we honor that? So, not only do I think a culture that would say, yes, we can honor it and we will, and we can see that it's important, that culture would cure aging. I think movement toward that culture would cause movement towards curing aging. I suspect anything less wouldn't, because a part of us knows there's something important that we would lose. Now, how to get to that culture? I don't know. I have basically one guess. Lots of clever schemes and ideas that come to mind, but I have basically one guess, which is, well, that's about humanity earning its immortality. Can I earn mine? Maybe if I can fully embody this, I end up being a living example of what it means to really be immortal. Not a numb, stupid, egoic version, but a wise version, being wisely immortal. If I can embody that, maybe that inspires others to also embody it, which inspires others, maybe. Or maybe not. Maybe I just come to have a deep acceptance of the lessons of aging and the lessons of death, so that I am ready for a cure that maybe doesn't come before I die. Taking that as a real possibility is one of the lessons. I'm still integrating this. I'm still ringing with it. It makes more sense than I fully embody. I can feel that. So this is definitely an edge for me. This is a challenge for me to fully integrate. But I can feel myself taking more and more steps in this direction. I can feel the rightness of it. And it feels beautiful. It's like being deeply, deeply respectful of everything about the honoring of aging and death, and everything about the honoring of the desire to live and to care for those that we love, to keep them alive and healthy, to keep ourselves alive and healthy, and to encourage flourishing. It feels like the deepest honoring of all of that. It continues a theme for me of learning how to love better, to love myself, to love others, to love this world, for however long I'm here, and to be ready to love well if I'm here for a long time or not. That's it. Thank you for listening.